and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio. We are a registered nonprofit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to take some time to thank all of our listeners who allow this program to continue to provide the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can find our weekly broadcasts every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, online at youtube.com/VOR radio, or you can join our Facebook page to find more information on our activities and past programs. It is June 15th, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. The Arakan Rohingya Union, an umbrella organization encompassing various human rights groups, is being represented at the 26th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva this week. Director General of the ARU, Dr. Udine, participated in the main session of the Human Rights Council, where delegations from the member countries and numerous non-governmental organizations, including the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, convened. In addition to the main event of the 26th session, Dr. Udine also attended side panels such as right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association, extrajudicial execution, and internally displaced persons, where Rohingya issues were discussed. Several NGOs also discussed the human rights violations faced by the Rohingya ethnic minority in Arakan. UNHCR conducted a detailed press briefing on violence in Arakan State, where thousands of people continue to sail to Southeast Asian countries due to abuse and exploitation, as people increasingly feel the need to seek safety and stability elsewhere. The briefing also covered the situation of more than 140,000 internally displaced people, primarily Rohingya and common Muslims, and the small-scale resumption of humanitarian assistance following the attacks on UN and NGO premises in Sittwe. During the 26th session, the OIC Independent Human Rights Commission and the Permanent Mission of OIC at UN Geneva also held meetings and events. At the meeting with the Human Rights Commission, Dr. Udine discussed a number of strategies and possible options for further engagement with international groups to initiate a dialogue with the relevant state and public sectors in Myanmar. In the events organized by the OIC Permanent Mission, Dr. Udine briefed the ambassadors on the current situation, highlighting the recent bill banning white card holders from forming or participating in political parties, the draft on religious conversion and marriage bills, the return of Nasaka under the new name Border Guard Police, continuing Nasaka's old dirty jobs, the volatile situation at the Myanmar-Bangladesh border, and the resumption of arrests of Rohingya on false charges of arson. Additionally, the return of some NGOs to work under the supervision of government-appointed Emergency Coordination Council, the stalled census process in Rohingya areas, the verification scheme, and other violations such as closure of places of worship, travel restrictions, marriage restrictions, human smuggling and trafficking, education, and a range of issues were highlighted. Dr. Udine has stressed that the most troubling is the reverse process that is tactfully devised by the government to sideline the most urgent issues such as restatement of citizenship and basic human rights, as it continues to create new humanitarian crises in IDP camps through the removal of NGOs. Now, the fundamental issues of citizenship and human rights are at the back burner. This is a slippery slope and part of the delay tactic, Dr. Udine concluded. Identifying avenues for peace and ethnic reconciliation in Arakan was the main topic of discussion at the Humanitarian Dialogue Center. Dr. Udine expressed his great appreciation to OCHA and OHCHR officials for their noble mission for humanity and human rights in Arakan, and the HD officials for the relentless efforts in conflict mediation to bring peace and communal harmony. Dr. Udine is now slated to attend the OIC Foreign Ministerial meeting at OIC headquarters in Jeddah, where he will be meeting with various government officials and OIC officials concerning the issues Rohingyas face. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for tuning in to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the USA. I am your host, Zach Taylor. Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator for the United Nations recently concluded her field missions to Rakhine and Kachin states, stressing the need for improved access to people in need of humanitarian assistance in Myanmar. During my trip, I witnessed the serious challenges that humanitarian workers face in delivering aid to the estimated 421,000 people in urgent need of life-saving assistance in Myanmar, the Assistant Secretary General said. Despite substantial progress in Myanmar's reform agenda over the past years, humanitarian conditions have deteriorated in some areas where people are in greatest need, but where access continues to pose a challenge, she added. In Rakhine State, Ms. Kang traveled with the Deputy Minister of Border Affairs to Sitwe and Paukta to visit IDP camps and host communities affected by intercommunal violence. She met with local authorities, community leaders, and humanitarian workers to evaluate progress in resuming and scaling up the humanitarian response following the 26th and 27th of March attacks on UN and NGO premises in Sitwe. Despite the strong support of the union authorities in this regard, the current capacity of the humanitarian community in Rakhine is still less than 60% of previous levels. The United Nations release said that many people in isolated villages and remote IDP camps continue to live in dire conditions, coupled with severe restrictions on their freedom of movement. The situation that I witnessed in one camp was appalling, with wholly inadequate access to basic services including health, education, water, and sanitation, said the ASG. Ms. Kang reminded the authorities of their responsibility to ensure that justice is rendered and that the perpetrators of the 26th and 27th of March attacks are brought to justice. The 2014 Humanitarian Response Plan for Myanmar has received 39% of the $192 million required. 66 million would provide humanitarian assistance to 111,000 people across Kachin and northern Shan states, while 126 million would provide assistance to 310,000 people across Rakhine State. Severely restricted access to food, medicine, and education is forcing many Rohingya to seek sanctuary abroad, Time reported on Thursday. More than 86,000 people have attempted the treacherous voyage from rest of Western Burma to perceived safe havens such as Malaysia since the outbreak of sectarian violence in mid-2012, according to the UN, which said that 615 people are known to have died making the journey in 2013 alone. As the UN released those figures, details emerged on Thursday of bloodshed in the Bay of Bengal, with 5 people killed and at least 151 injured after traffickers opened fire on a boat carrying 330 illegal migrants. UN Refugee Agency spokesman Adrian Edwards told a briefing in Geneva Tuesday that the UNHCR estimates more than 86,000 people have left on boats since June of 2012. This includes more than 16,000 people in the second half of 2012, 55,000 in 2013, and nearly 15,000 from January to April this year. Upon arrival in new countries, such as Thailand or Indonesia, the article illustrates many get sold to traffickers and used as forced labor, often upon fishing boats. Though the United Nations report details the risk of human trafficking in countries such as Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, it reports that Bangladesh has seen some positive developments over the past year, such as extending education through middle school and 2 official camps, where at least 300,000 Rohingya are now living. A source of hope came to us from inside the Myanmar border today, as Voice of Rohingya Radio has learned of an effort to unify disparate Rohingya villages across Rakhine State. The Arakan Rohingya Union, in conjunction with the Global Rohingya Center, has devised a representative program to join the voices of Rohingya communities together. A committee comprising of 26 heads has been formed to work with 260 unions, which represent 3 to 5 villages each. The committee has begun their efforts by conducting a survey to build a database in a less restrictive manner than the troubled UNFPA census, which will help to quantify the issue. This endeavor could help to bring a sense of unity to the Rohingya and help to add weight to the problems facing them. In other news, Rohingya across the world are commemorating the 2nd anniversary of the atrocities that were committed throughout Rakhine State in June of 2012, events that still resonate through the hearts and minds of Rohingya everywhere. The Arakan Rohingya Union offered a video representing their feelings about the anniversary last Saturday.
To Rohingya people worldwide, this is Dr. Wakaruddin from the Secretariat of Arakan Rohingya Union. With a great sorrow and sadness about what happened to Rohingya people in Sitwe and other cities in Arakan State in June 10th, 2 years ago, I would like to share a moment with you on this Memorial Day of June 10th. During the past 2 years, the situation for Rohingya people in Arakan state did not change. In fact, overall, the situation has deteriorated in many places. The future of Rohingya is Arakan and Arakan only. We have been there for many, many centuries, and we are there now, and we will be there in the future. And there's no change in our position on this issue of Rohingya ethnicity and Rohingya citizenship with all basic rights.
Voice of Rohingya Radio would also like to observe a moment of silence to remember the brothers and sisters the world has suffered to lose during the last 2 years of violence. Thank you. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcasts every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific here in the United States at youtube.com/VOR Radio, or you can join our Facebook page. Thanks to generous contributions from our supporters, Voice of Rohingya Radio will be attending the Myanmar Muslims Genocide Awareness Convention next week in Los Angeles, where I'll be conducting interviews with key figures and bringing you news from the conference room floor. If you are in the Los Angeles area, please feel free to attend and show your support. And for our regular listeners, I'll have a guest host next week taking the helm during my absence, but you can still listen to the program during its regularly scheduled broadcast. I would like to close with words from the late Franklin Roosevelt, who said, "The point in history at which we stand is full of promise and danger. The world will either move towards unity and widely shared prosperity, or it will move apart." I would like to commend the forces who are unifying Rohingya villages in Rakhine and around Myanmar. 2 years ago this month, families were torn apart. Sons, daughters, fathers were taken from this world. 2 years later, families are still being not torn, but slowly and painfully pulled apart. Fathers leave their wives to avoid the shame of their disability to support their children. Mothers, daughters flee to distant shores for protection, only to be separated and sent to forced labor camps. Children die from lack of basic medical aid after barely seeing their world and only knowing one of destitution. And villages sit untraversable miles between their shared hearths and hearts. With our voices joined and our causes unified, only then can we effect great change. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.